Welcome back. This is the second video for Lab 2 for the Windows 2000 DNS, Building a DNS Infrastructure for Wired Brain Coffee Incorporated. In this lab we're going to do several things. One of the first things we're going to do is install DNS on SRv11 and get a better feeling for how DNS is actually installed once again, just to make sure you understand. After we install DNS on SRv11, we're then going to create a standard secondary zone, wiredbraincoffee.com, and initiate zone transfers from SRv1 down to SRv11. Also in this lab, we're going to take a look at some of the different features and options we can set within the DNS console. Before we get started, let's take a look at our lab diagram just to make sure we're comfortable with everything we're going to be doing. Here once again is SRv1, and on SRv1 notice we've got the wiredbraincoffee.com zone that we created in lab 1. This is the standard primary. On SRv11, we'll be creating a standard secondary zone. Once again, it'll be named wiredbraincoffee.com. And that's because this is going to be a read-only copy of this master database up here. Okay, and the reason we create secondaries, really a couple of reasons. One is for fault tolerance. If this system goes down, where does that leave us for DNS? So anytime you're installing DNS, it's more than likely you'll be putting in at least 2 different DNS servers. Another reason we'll do it is for speed. If I have 2 DNS servers and my network is running real slow as far as DNS name resolutions are concerned, I might want to add a 3rd or a 4th DNS server just to speed up the actual DNS resolution time. Okay, so let's get started now. Once again, we're sitting here on the Windows 2000 professional computer, and you know that because of this logo that we have here, and also I've renamed my computer icon to Client 1. So we're going to have to connect over to SRv11, and we'll be doing that with a Terminal Services client installed here locally, and obviously Terminal Services is installed on SRv11. SRv11 is marked appropriately, and the background here is blue. You'll notice when we get to SRv1 that SRv1 is black, just so we can differentiate. First thing we're going to do is go to Start, Settings, Control Panel, and we're going to go up to Add Remove Programs, Add Remove Windows Components, and then go down to Networking Services. Mention this in Lab 1, but make sure you don't check this box. That'll install all of the networking services, including DNS. We want to drill down and only install DNS, not the rest of these. So I'll click OK here, click Next. This pops up because of the terminal services that's installed on the server. You may not see this because you probably don't have terminal services installed. So no big deal. I'm just going to specify I'm still in remote administration mode. Click Next. And we're going to start copying files over, and it's most likely going to ask me for my CD-ROM here. Yes. Okay, so what I'll do here is click OK, and if I have a CD-ROM I can pop that in. I think I've got my source files copied over, so let's take a look. And yes, I do. I'm going to go up here a couple steps and show you where we're at. Here's my C drive. I copied the i386 folder off of the Windows 2000 Advanced Server CD-ROM, so I can open this up, then click Open, and OK. And that's going to finish up copying all the files over, and we'll get DNS installed here in a second or so anyway. Come on. OK. Click Finish, Close, Close, and we're back to the desktop. I'm going to go up to Start, Programs, Administrative Tools, and then open up DNS. Now that I've opened up DNS, I can see the server icon for SRv11. Next thing we're going to do, just so you know you can do this, right-click on the DNS little tree up here, click on Connect to Computer, and I'm going to go out and I'm actually going to specify a different computer in my network. And our computer name is SRv1 for the other system on our network, so I'm going to go ahead and type that in, click OK. And look what happens here. I now have SRv1 and SRv11 up here underneath my DNS console. This confuses people sometimes, so let's explain this for a little bit here and make sure that you're comfortable with what you see. SRv1 is still SRv1. It's a completely different computer. I'm just able to manage DNS from this system. So anything that I change here, if I were to, for example, delete this zone or add to our host records that we created in Lab 1, those would be changed on SRV1. So even though I'm sitting here at SRV11, changes aren't happening there. If I want to manage SRV11, well, then I go to SRV11. Okay, and when I look on SRV11, notice I just installed DNS, so there's no forward lookup zone here. I'm clicking and there's nothing over here in the right pane, and there's no reverse lookup zone either. So that's what we're going to take care of first. Let's go through here and create a forward lookup zone on SRV11. So I'm going to first expand this a little bit so we can see, then right click and go to new zone. And click past this. And here's the first major decision. We already have wiredbraincoffee.com as a standard primary, and there can only be one standard primary for any one given zone. So this DNS server is going to be hosting a standard secondary zone for wiredbraincoffee.com. So I'm going to select standard secondary and then click next. My next option here, I can either browse or type in the name of the zone. I'm going to type in wiredbraincoffee.com. Double check this spelling. It's very important this matches up. So I've got wiredbraincoffee.com. Looks good. Next, I'm going to click next. And here I get to specify the master DNS server. Okay, and when we specify the master DNS server, this is who we're going to copy all the zone information from. Remember, this is a secondary DNS server. I'm going to talk more about this in a second, but it has a read-only copy. I can't create host records on this secondary DNS zone or within the secondary DNS zone. So the first thing we'll do is specify the IP address of the master. And the master in our case is going to be our standard primary DNS zone, which is SRV1. Okay, and it's 201. Make sure you click add, then next. Okay, then I'm going to click finish. And you notice I've got my zone here. The next test is to see if our records actually transfer down. And if you look here, all of my records transfer down. Okay, so here's my forward lookup zone from SRV1. And hopefully you went through Lab 1 with me before, but we created all these records manually. Here we did not create these records, they were copied down. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of an idea of how this works, and we'll cover some more of this in depth here in a second. Something to point out though, like I mentioned before, if I go to my SRV1, I don't mean to confuse you with our two different DNS servers here, but remember this is SRV1, totally different server. But if I go here and I'm going to right click on one of these records, we'll just pick on SRV2 here, I have the option to delete this record. And I'm not going to, I just want to show you that you do have that option. Now go back over to SRV11 here, and I'm going to choose that same forward lookup zone, wiredbraincoffee.com, and that same resource record. If I right click here, I don't have that delete option. And the reason is what I said before. This is a read-only copy of this database. So I can't do anything with that record. If I wanted to delete it or get rid of it, I'd have to do it from SRV1. Okay, let's move forward then. We're going to go and create the reverse lookup zone now and see if we can get those to transfer over as well. So I'm going to right click on reverse lookup zones, new zone, next, standard primary or standard secondary. Okay, once again, we already have a primary for this particular subnet that we're going to be using, so we're going to create a standard secondary. Network ID is going to be the same one we used before, 192.168.1. Record is generated here automatically once again. And what's my master DNS server? Where should I copy this reverse lookup zone database from? That's going to be the same thing we just specified. So 192.168.1.201, which is SRV1. Click add and next, and then I'll click finish to finish it up. Okay, let's double check our work here again. I have SRV1, reverse lookup zone. If I open up this particular reverse lookup zone, I see that I have 5 different PTR records. Let's go down here and check and see if we have those PTR records for SRV11. Sometimes they don't transfer over right away. Okay, and here, this is very common. Zone not loaded by DNS server, and this can be caused for numerous different reasons. Okay, first thing, sometimes it takes a little bit of time. So I would try to refresh, doesn't work sometimes. I would also try to reload this zone. Okay, so let's go back over here and reload. Okay, still nothing. And the next thing, for some reason, DNS seems to like to be closed down and then reopen. So let's try that out too. These are some things, I want to walk through this because these are things that come up a lot of times when you're working with DNS. So it's important that we look at them as well so you can get a feel for it. Okay, still not loaded. Okay, so I'm going to try hitting F5 here to refresh once again. Okay, still having problems for some reason. So let's go back here and see if we can troubleshoot. And I can think of one issue that might be causing a problem right off the bat. So let's see if we can't identify that. I stressed to you twice already how important the primary DNS suffix is in our particular case since we're running standalone servers. So let's go take a look and see if we actually set that in SRv11. There you go. Okay, we don't have a primary DNS suffix. So this is something we want to address. I'm going to go here and go to Properties. Now I'm going to click on More. And we want to set this primary DNS suffix. This could be causing problems right here. So we're going to enter this in. And it is wiredbraincoffee.com. Okay, and while we're here, let's talk about this once again because I think it's something that's a little bit confusing. What is a primary DNS suffix of this computer? Okay, well first off, primary DNS suffix, this is going to be appended to the actual computer name itself. Normally, if you're in a Windows 2000 Active Directory domain, that domain name is appended to you. So maybe we formed an Active Directory domain named trainsignal.com. If that was the case, trainsignal.com would be appended to my SRv11 computer name here. We don't have a Windows 2000 domain form though. We're in a work group. Okay, and we're not going to be in a domain in this particular lab. So in that case, if we want to actually use a DNS domain like we specified back here, wiredbraincoffee.com, we need to make sure that all the computers that are going to participate in this network are artificially placed inside this domain. And that's pretty much the equivalent of what's happening here. We're artificially placing this computer inside the wiredbraincoffee.com domain. So I'm going to click OK here, and this is going to force us to reboot, which is okay. Before we do that, I'm going to close my DNS console, and I'm going to stop the video. We'll be right back up, and then we'll continue on, and we'll take a look at troubleshoot, see if this fixes our problem. Okay, we're back up and running here at the desktop, and the first thing we're going to do is take a look at our primary DNS suffix. Let's make sure that setting took hold. So I right-click on my computer and go to Properties. Off of the Network Identification tab, we'll go back to Properties again, although we can see our setting right here, and click on More. Okay, so there's that setting we originally set. Here we see it again, the fully qualified domain name, full computer name, srv-11.wiredbraincoffee.com. So that did indeed work. Now let's go back and take a look at DNS and see if our problem with the reverse lookup zone transferring from the standard primary down to the standard secondary has been solved as well. If you recall, here's our reverse lookup zone, and we're having a problem getting these records down to SRv11 in our standard secondary. Okay, and now no problem, they've transferred down. Before we go forward, let's double check a couple things just to make sure we don't have any errors. What we can do is take a look at our forward lookup zone first, wiredbraincoffee.com. And this is the standard primary. So what I'm going to do is take a look at this number right here, which is a serial number. I want to compare that to the serial number that's shown in my secondary zone. That also reads 5. Think of this as kind of like an incremental update, if you will. If this number here is 5, then for this record to be completely updated, it should also have a 5. So this is telling me these two zones right now are completely in sync. Let's check our reverse lookup zones as well. Here I've got a 6. Here I've got a 6 as well. Okay, so if you didn't notice right there, these numbers, forward lookup zone and reverse lookup zone, they don't have to be in sync. It's the standard primary forward lookup zone and the standard secondary forward lookup zone, and the same thing for our two reverses. Okay, now what we're going to do is move forward and take a look at some of the different properties on the wiredbraincoffee.com zone. Before we do that, make sure that you understand These properties are set on a zone-by-zone basis. If I were to create another zone on SRV1, let's say trainsignal.com, I would have totally different properties to set on that particular zone. If I set properties on the DNS server, that's going to affect all the different zones within this server. I'm going to right-click on wiredbraincoffee.com and then go down to Properties. On this first tab, our General tab, see several different settings. First one here is the status of the DNS server itself, or this zone in more particular. If I want to stop this zone from functioning right now, I can click on Pause, and as you see here, this zone is now paused. This is going to prevent any name resolution from happening, so this isn't something you want to do on a day-to-day basis. So let's start that back up and take a look at the next one here. The type is the type of zone that wiredbraincoffee.com is. I can change this if I want to. Once again, Active Directory integrated is grayed out because we don't have a Windows 2000 domain environment. There is no Active Directory on our network. Both of the servers we're currently running with are standalone servers in a workgroup. So if we wanted to, we can make this zone a standard secondary, but there's really no reason we'd want to do that at this time. Our zone file name was created when we first created the zone. So this is kind of set in stone right now. We could change it if we wanted to, but there's really no reason. This next setting is pretty important. Dynamic updates are a new feature of Windows 2000, and they're also referred to as Dynamic DNS or DDNS if you've heard of that. And the cool thing about dynamic updates is it allows the DNS client to automatically update itself with the wiredbraincoffee.com zone. So for example, let me show you what I'm talking about here. All of these records, these host records in NT 4.0, they would have had to have been entered manually. So if I had 1,000 different computers on the network and I wanted to put all of them into my DNS database, I'd have to enter each one of these records manually. With Windows 2000 and Dynamic DNS, the host records now can be created dynamically by going through DHCP. Windows 95, Windows 98, Windows 2000 XP, they're capable of automatically creating their own records and also updating the host records. So your job as an administrator managing DNS is much, much simpler than it was in NT 4.0. Okay, so let's open up this property screen. Back up here. And we're going to set this to yes. We do want to allow dynamic updates. So we can go ahead and make that change. And last thing to talk about here, to set aging, scavenging properties, click aging. Okay, a couple different settings in here. We're not going to concern ourselves with these too much right now, but scavenging has to do with cleaning up the DNS database. If you have old entries that you want removed on a periodical basis, this is where you do it. Okay, let's move forward to the start of authority record now. The start of authority record is determined by what we see right here. This is the actual start of authority record, the record within our DNS database itself. What we see here is the graphical representation of that record. The very first entry we see on top is the serial number, and the serial number is what we talked about before. We could increment this manually if we wanted to, but it's not recommended and there's really no reason we'd want to do that. The primary server is the server that's authoritative for this particular zone. So SRV1 is where the primary DNS database is. That's the primary server. Responsible person could be an administrator or another figure. This is the form of an email address in DNS. So this is the equivalent of admin@wiredbraincoffee.com. The refresh interval is how often the secondary DNS servers are going to contact the primary DNS servers for zone transfers. Every 15 minutes, regardless of whether or not there's a change or not, the secondary DNS servers are going to get in contact with the primary DNS servers and initiate a zone transfer. The retry interval has to do with how long they're going to wait before they retry and check back with that primary DNS server. So after 15 minutes, if a secondary is trying to talk to the primary and it's not available, it'll wait 10 minutes and then try back again. The expires after entry is how long the secondary is going to hold its DNS information. So for example, the secondary DNS database contains all the entries from the primary DNS server. How long are we going to wait before we get rid of all the records? So after 1 day, all those entries are going to expire, and the wiredbraincoffee.com zone on the secondary DNS server is essentially worthless at that point. So this server is going to quit resolving records. The minimum default time to live speaks of another feature in Windows 2000 DNS, which is called caching. Anytime a DNS server resolves a host name to an IP address, it maintains a cache on the local DNS server. So if another person comes back and asks for that same record, for example, if somebody went out to www.microsoft.com, well, now this is going to be cached. Instead of having to go out through the DNS namespace on the internet once again, it's going to return this entry right out of its cache. Time to live for this record refers to the time to live for the start of authority record itself. Okay, now we're going to look at the name servers tab. And the name servers tab specifies which name servers I currently have within the network. And I don't have to add name servers here. As you see, SRV11 is not listed here, and it still was able to receive zone transfers. We'll talk about why this is important in a second here. The Wins tab isn't nearly as important as it was in NT 4.0 either. With the Wins tab, what you can do, if I select this, use Wins forward lookup, it allows me to specify an IP address of a Wins server here. And this is helpful if you have a really populated Wins database. Let's say that we've got an NT 4.0 network that's migrating to Windows 2000 or just migrated to Windows 2000. We still might be using Wins and have a very populated Wins database. So what this will do, anytime we're attempting to do a hostname resolution, we have the option of also specifying the Wins server. So we can use the Wins server anytime we're trying to resolve names. Next tab we have is the Zone Transfers tab. By default, it's set allow zone transfers to any server. So that's why we're able to have zone transfers between SRV11 and SRV1. If we wanted to get more secure, and I recommend that you do, we can select this next option, either the second one or the third one. This option here says only to servers listed on the Name Servers tab. Now SRV1 is the only server listed, so that's going to prevent SRV1 from transferring to SRV11. So we're going to want to add SRV11 at this time, and to get this record I'm going to browse. This is kind of confusing. Spend a couple minutes talking about what this actually is here. A lot of people think that this is the record, so they just select SRV11 and click OK. And it actually, it doesn't accept that. It opens up SRV11. So let's go back here and talk about what we're looking at. We're looking inside DNS. So what we're going to be doing is specifying the name of an actual host record to represent SRV11. So I'm going to open up SRV1 and then open up the forward lookup zone on SRV1. Then open up wiredbraincoffee.com and then get my record for SRV11. That automatically puts in the host name and the IP address. Then I click OK. Now you see I have SRV1 and SRV11, and according to this setting, these servers will now be able to zone transfer with each other. If for some reason I didn't want to use the Name Servers tab, I could also use this option here only to the following servers. If I select this option, I can enter individual IP addresses that this standard primary can transfer to. We're going to leave this on only to servers listed on the Name Servers tab though. Last option we're going to talk about here is the Notify button. If I click on Notify, I get a little message here telling me this is to automatically notify secondary servers when the zone changes. Select the following checkbox and then specify the servers. So what this is doing, anytime there's an update to the zone, so if the primary we add a resource record, we put a new host record in, it's automatically going to notify the secondary servers. So right away they're going to be replicating a lot quicker. Remember before we had that other setting, the refresh interval, where it checked every 15 minutes? That's the default setting. But with this selected here like it was by default, that's going to automatically notify those secondary servers, so the replication is going to be instantaneous. We're going to leave this on for right now. And you may want to disable this in a network where you're concerned about the bandwidth and your DNS servers are hogging a lot of bandwidth on that local area network. Small network right now, we're not too concerned about it, so I'm just going to leave this on, take advantage of the fast replication between my standard primary and my standard secondary. So I click OK, click OK again. Oop. Forgot to uncheck my Use Wins forward lookup box here. Click OK again and we're back to the desktop. Okay, so we've got DNS pretty well configured right now. So what we're going to do is go back to the client. So I'm going to log off SRV11, and that'll take us back to client 1. Okay, here we're sitting on client 1, and what we're going to do now is use client 1 to connect to SRV11 and SRV1. So the first thing we're going to do is go take a look at our DNS settings. So I'm going to go to the properties of my network places, properties of my network card. We're going to look at the TCP/IP settings here. Okay, currently my preferred DNS server is pointing to 192.168.1.201, and I do not have an alternate specified. Don't be misled by this. I think I mentioned this once before, but I want to make sure that I stress this because I have a lot of students who think this way. The preferred DNS server and the alternate DNS server that you see here have nothing to do with primaries and secondaries. I can just as easily, as we're going to do here in a second, I can just as easily make my preferred DNS server a secondary and my alternate a primary. And that's how you should set it up in a network. If you had 2 DNS servers, a primary and a DNS server, and you have 1,000 client computers, you want to have 500 computers pointing to the primary as the preferred DNS server and 500 computers pointing to the alternate. Pointing to the secondary as their preferred DNS server. That way what you're doing is you're splitting up the workload amongst both of those DNS servers. Okay, let's change our settings here like I promised we were going to do. What we're going to do is we're going to make our secondary DNS server our preferred DNS server for this client. So I'm going to change this to 211. So the preferred setting is 192.168.1.211, and my alternate is going to be 192.168.1.201, which is the IP address of SRV1. Okay, so I'm going to click OK. Make sure you click OK all the way out of this so it takes those changes. We'll close this, and then we're going to go to a command prompt. Start, run, type in CMD. Okay, what we're going to do, we're going to run NS lookup and take a look at what we see. And recall from Lab 1, NS lookup, name server lookup, it's a troubleshooting tool that we use with DNS. Okay, so I hit enter here, and look who my default server is now. srv11.wiredbraincoffee.com. Previously it was SRV1 at 192.168.1.201. Okay, let's put in another entry here. Set type equals any, and now we're going to enter wiredbraincoffee.com, the name of our DNS domain, and hit enter. Here once again, we get the start of authority information. Okay, and if you remember, we had our name server. Here's the primary name server, SRV1. Here's the responsible mail address, admin.wiredbraincoffee.com. All this stuff was in that start of authority record. We saw the text version and we saw the graphical version. Here's the serial number. We've made a change. That's been incremented. Here's our refresh interval, 15 minutes, retries at 10, expires after 1 day. Our TTL, time to live, is set at 1 hour. Okay, just to show you how this works. Okay, next thing we're going to do, what we want to see is what happens if for some reason our preferred DNS server is not available. Not our primary, our preferred. So we're sitting here at client 1. Remember, my preferred DNS server is SRV11 and my alternate DNS server is SRV1. So what we're going to do is we're going to simulate a DNS failure and unplug SRV11 from the hub. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video here for a second, take care of this network problem, and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Just got done unplugging SRV11. What we're going to do now is go test this out. So we're going to go back to Start, Run, and go to a command prompt. We're going to type in NS lookup once again. And when I hit enter, notice what happens here. The DNS request has timed out after 2 seconds, and it can't find the server at 192.168.1.211. And this is client 1's preferred DNS server. So what happens, it goes down to the alternate DNS server, server 1 at 192.168.1.201. Okay, let's take a look at another thing we can do. Let's type in that same command we typed in before. Set type equals any, and then wiredbraincoffee.com. When I type this command in, look what we get. We see the exact same information we had before. The only thing that's really different is who we're getting it from. This time we're getting it from SRV1 at 201, but the name servers are both listed, the primary name server is there, the DNS administrator, serial number, refresh, retry, expire, all this stuff is identical. Okay, so regardless of where we're getting this information from, the database is identical. Okay, what we're going to do now is going to exit out of here. And we've got one more step we're going to do in this lab. I need to plug in SRV11, so I'm going to pause this video real quick. I'll be right back after I plug this in, and we'll continue on with the last part of this lab. Okay, I'm back. What we're going to do now is kind of just the opposite of what we were doing previously. In this last section, we had simulated failure on SRV11. Well, this time we're going to simulate failure on our primary SRV1. We're not going to unplug the hub. We're just going to make believe a little bit here. So first things first, we're going to have to terminal service over to one of our DNS servers. So I'm going to do that, and we'll just connect to SRV11. And what we're going to do in this section is promote our secondary DNS server up to a primary. This is a very important concept to understand. It's not terribly difficult, but it's something you should be able to do in case you lose your primary DNS server. Because keep in mind, without your primary DNS server, you can't make any changes to the DNS database. So first things first, I'm going to go over to SRV11, open up the forward lookup zone, and change this over by clicking on change to a standard primary. Okay, and we're going to go through and make sure that these settings are consistent with what we set before on our standard primary. So click yes. All these other settings should be okay. Zone transfers looks good. Notify looks okay. Actually, we had automatically notify selected. We will go ahead and select that again. Servers listed on the name servers tab, and then we'll click OK. And go down and do that for our reverse lookup zone as well. Okay, so we go to the properties of the reverse lookup zone. We're going to change from a secondary to a standard primary. So this will be the master DNS database now. Dynamic updates. Both are on the name server tab. Allow zone transfers to servers on the name servers tab only. That's good. Okay, automatically notify servers listed on the name servers tab. Okay, so we're all set from this standpoint. Now let's talk about what we have here. Keep in mind, SRV was down. Okay, and if we just brought SRV back up again, SRV1 back up again, we could make it a standard primary, taking over its old role. There's really no reason to. Okay, any DNS server is capable of running as a standard primary, so it's not a big deal. What we'll do then here is change this over to a standard secondary. We can't have two standard primaries within one DNS database because now how they're configured right now, they won't replicate changes back and forth to each other. So I need to set this up as a standard secondary. So we're going to change this to secondary. And now it changes what's up here. Now I've got to actually put in the IP address of SRV11 to transfer over any database changes. So I enter the IP address, 1.211, click add, and OK. And we'll do the same thing over here on a reverse lookup zone. Okay, change, standard secondary, and then the IP address of SRV11, our master. Click add and click OK again. Okay, so at this point right now, we should have accomplished switching the roles of these two different servers. Let's test this out and see what we actually have though. If I go over to the wiredbraincoffee.com zone, let's take a look. Before, remember when I right-clicked on SRV2, I was not able to delete that record? Now I have that option because this is now a standard primary. Okay, and vice versa over here. Before I was able to delete SRV2, and now I don't have that option anymore. I'm going to go back over to SRV11's forward lookup zone here, and we're going to try and create a new host record. Shouldn't be a problem because we have read-write access. And we'll just make one up for SRV12 with an IP address of 192.168.1.212. Now create that associated PTR record, click Add Hosts. Okay, and no problem. There's my record right there. In the reverse lookup zone, I'm going to click Refresh here, and I've got my record here. What we want to check though, are zone transfers working? Did we actually transfer this record, SRV12 and .212, did they transfer over to our secondaries? Okay, so far it doesn't look like they did. Let's refresh this and see what happens. There it is. Okay, so now we've reversed the roles. Let's double check, make sure the reverse lookup zone is working, and it is. So we've successfully reversed the roles. We now have a standard primary DNS server over here and a standard secondary DNS zone over here. Okay, this wraps up Lab 2. We're going to see you back here real quick, I hope, for Lab 3.